Hello everyone, a warm welcome to the debate on Press TV. I'm your host, Behrouz Najafi. The U.S. GDP has plunged at almost 33% in the second quarter. The collapse has been unprecedented in speed and also breathtaking in intensity. Jobless claims have also been rising for weeks, and share sell-offs picked up after Trump tweeted about a delay in the election. Now, many experts believe economic recovery seems to be pretty far-fetched. What's become of U.S. economy? How big an impact has the administration's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic had on the economy? And how's the situation going to affect the November presidential election? Stick around for a debate on the issue. Let's start with a report.
The U.S. Commerce Department says the country's economy contracted by nearly 33% in the second quarter of 2020 as the novel coronavirus continues to infect and kill more people across the country. The decline, though slightly less bad than expected, was the worst on record for the world's largest economy. Figures released by the Commerce Department show that compared to the same quarter last year, economic activity in the U.S. fell 9.5%. The plunge in GDP was driven largely by the drop in consumer spending. U.S. stocks futures were down a bit less than 1% following the report. Meanwhile, U.S. jobless claims saw another hike after over 1.4 million Americans filed for unemployment benefits last week. The Labor Department says the figure is some 12,000 applications higher than the previous week. Analysts believe that the U.S. is highly unlikely to bounce back from the economic collapse very soon.
There's no possibility of a recovery now for the American economy without a successful vaccine, which has to be distributed free of charge to everybody in the country. And you then have to have a strict border quarantine to stop any disease coming in from anywhere else in the world. That is at least, I'm not an expert on vaccines, obviously, but it's a pipe dream to think that's going to happen in less than a year.
The developments come as U.S. President Donald Trump has suggested for the first time that the country's upcoming presidential election could be delayed. Trump also repeated his claim about a possibility of voter fraud with mail-in voting. Reacting to Trump's idea of holding up the November election, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi tweeted a quote from the Constitution stressing that congressional authorities needed to delay the vote and that the president does not have the jurisdiction to do so. U.S. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell also said that the date of the presidential vote is set in stone, stressing that elections have been held during past crises. The U.S. president's response to the COVID-19 pandemic has deteriorated into a misinformation masterclass that explains a deepening crisis in America. Trump's negligence has dashed hopes of his loyalists that his return to the briefing room after weeks of denial about a coronavirus could win back voters who are despairing over his handling of COVID-19. But more important than mere political calculations is the evidence that Trump's obsessions have left no doubt that he has neither a coordinated national strategy nor any knowledge of leadership as required of a president at a time when the country struggles with one of the world's worst responses to the coronavirus pandemic.
Time now to invite our experts to the debate. Joining me will be writer and political analyst Charles Ortel from New York and senior analyst with Foreign Policy in Focus, Ian Williams, also from New York. Great to have you both gentlemen on the show. Now let's go to Charles. The contraction in U.S. economy in the second quarter has been the worst on record, and this is marking America's plunge into recession in 11 years. What factors do you think contributed to this slump?
First of all, that's never happened before, so this is, I think, a statistical aberration. Explains 100% of the problem. We, to this date, have no clue how many cases actually occurred prior to March 16th. We have inexact estimates of how many people have died, either directly and primarily due to COVID and its implications, or because of comorbidities. When you look at the 150,000 death level and compare it to deaths from influenza, deaths from accidents, deaths from suicides, yes, it's a problem and it's not a great situation we're dealing with, but shutting the entire economy down and the world's economy down the way we did, in theory, to bend the curve, and now the excuse is slightly different, and you had a commentator on who frankly doesn't know anything, suggesting that we're never going to open the economy back up until there's a vaccine. There are plenty of viruses for which we don't have vaccines, and it strikes me that this really shows the failures of globalization and bureaucracy rather than the failures of Donald Trump.
All right. Now Ian, President Trump is, speaking of delaying the November election, which is, of course, not constitutional, and he argues that a universal mail-in voting will produce the most inaccurate and fraudulent election in history. Is he worried about electoral fraud? He has even refused to accept the November election results. What's he talking about? I mean, what is behind his proposal to delay the vote?
I think that what's behind his proposal is an increasing impingement of reality, even on his consciousness, that he thinks he's very likely to lose a vote in November. So he is, as always, trying to remanufacture reality to meet his dreams. In his dreams, he's going to win. He's going to be elected almost in perpetuity. So if he's going to lose, then he can't have the election, or the election won't be valid. I mean, and this type of bizarre thinking is becoming more and more apparent. You know, it is quite clear that no matter how many tests he has, competency tests, he is not competent to be in this position. His answers to questions are rambling, and we were talking before, nobody knows the statistics. Now, there's room for some statistical inaccuracy, for some creepage, the difficulty of distinguishing between flu deaths and pneumonia deaths and COVID deaths. There could be a good faith effort to try and get this. We know there's a huge number of excess deaths. You don't even have to have a calculator to do this. You just have to go down to the morgues. Only this week, yet again, they discovered several truckloads of decomposing corpses, which are piling up in the funeral homes faster than they can be dealt with. That's not just a number. That is a very vivid depiction of the reality of this crisis. A lot more people are dying now than they were before. And a lot more people are not working than were before. So it's no mystery that there's a huge drop in the economy. In fact, I would say that if it wasn't that the reality was shocked decision makers out of their neoliberal shells, things would be even worse. If the government hadn't pumped unlimited amounts of money into the economy, if it hadn't thrown money at everyone in sight, if it hadn't paid unemployment benefits, the figures would be far, far worse. I mean, this is what you get when you're paying people for the first time almost in America and New York, livable unemployment benefits. If you don't pay them, then you possibly have mass revolt on your hand, as well as mass poverty and mass economic destruction. So the only thing I think it's going to get worse, unless the government gets shocked into even more activity of the same kind. They're discussing at the moment, Mitch McConnell, I believe, he thinks that $200 a week is more than enough for people to live on. That's sort of half a grocery bill. It's probably less than his restaurant tab when he goes out for lunch. But he thinks that's enough for a family to live on for a week. It isn't. And at the moment, they're battling about whether to extend the unemployment benefit. If they don't extend it, not only is the economy going to get worse, but discontent is going to rise even more. And once again, this is why Trump is worried. There are a lot of disgruntled people out there who will say, why am I starving this week? Why am I not getting the money? The checks that he so kindly wrote with his name on from the US Treasury aren't coming anymore. If he put his name on when they came, maybe it's his name that's there when they're stopped as well. He has to take responsibility. And of course, he can't do that. But I think all the signs are bad, but it's difficult to read the signs. The stock market is completely disconnected from the real economy. There are companies like Kodak, which is a zombie company, famous for making things that nobody wants to buy anymore, camera film. And that's been ricocheting up and down. It's a zombie stock where people are speculating on it. And that's the state of the economy. The stock market has very little relation to the actual numbers out there. There's the people playing. It's like a huge casino. It always was, but it's even more overtly so at the moment. So you're not, you shouldn't really get any signs from the economy, from the stock market, which has done remarkably well. But that's detached from the real economy, quite clearly.
I see. Now, Charles, President Trump didn't heed what I call the Chinese virus in the early days when the pandemic hit. What has changed now? I mean, why is he asking for a delay in the presidential election? Some argue maybe it's because he wants to make up for his mishandling of the pandemic and to try to win some votes.
Well, I would be very cautious. Donald Trump is an expert at trolling the wider world. And what people are forgetting about is that what happened in 2015 and 2016 and what is under investigation and has been under robust investigations, plural, is a process wherein the Clinton-Obama wing of the Democratic Party, I believe, rigged the Democratic primary to install Hillary over Bernie, and then attempted to steal the election, and when that didn't work, attempted to resist, and has been attempting to resist, the Donald Trump presidency. Which is worse, delaying the election or an incumbent president and one wing of the Democrats actually spying on Americans across the political spectrum, spying on the Sanders team, spying on Republicans? And I think Donald Trump has set the table now for us to consider the wider context of whatever will happen from the Durham and related probes. So be very careful when we start thinking about election results. Donald Trump, I think, has a lot to talk about, and it's going to shock the American public and the rest of the world. As for America's position in the rest of the world, Donald Trump wisely has taken on the Communist Chinese Party and China itself. And I think what we're going to see now is a number of other countries. Boris Johnson's England initially resisted what we were trying to do against Huawei. Now he's on board. Other countries around the world, which are much smaller markets, are going to find themselves in a position where American multinational companies are going to come back home, employ people in America. Prospects in America will improve much better than prospects in a diminished Germany, a diminished UK, diminished France, diminished Japan, and elsewhere, and certainly than in a diminished China. So I wouldn't be so quick to assume that Donald Trump has lost his marbles here. I think he's effecting long-delayed and much overdue structural change which will benefit people regardless of their ethnicity, their political persuasion, or whatever. I think what he's doing is, in fact, excellent.
All right, Ian, speaking of jobs that Charles also mentioned, 1.5 million more Americans have filed unemployment claims this week, and this is the 19th week in a row that the tally is exceeding 1 million. So, and this is a figure that never heard of before the pandemic. So what's going to happen to those jobs?
Well, a lot of them aren't going to come back. I mean, the city centres are deserted. They're wastelands. Since Ronald Reagan and his successors presided over the disembowelment of the U.S. industrial economy, we've relied upon the service economy. And those services depend upon meeting people, on saying hello to people, on shaking hands with people, on handing people plates full of food. That's no longer on. The places are closing down. The people who worked in those places are closing down. There might well be a readjustment. The government will have to pay people to adjust there. And I really don't think that Donald Trump is following a coherent strategy. We happen to know that he was quite prepared to throw away the Uyghurs in Xinjiang for a trade deal. He was quite prepared to blow away the Hong Kong democracy fighters for a trade deal. We're not a principled objection here. We're not even talking a long-term one. We're talking about someone who is a very astute day-to-day politician. He plays his cards as he gets them, but he's not a chess player. He's not thinking moves ahead. He plays each day as it comes, and each day is different. And now the cards have been dealt, the chessboard has been set. It's nothing he's been prepared for, and he's looking increasingly shell-shocked. He looks like he looks like a boxer who's been put in with Muhammad Ali and wonders what happened when the 30th hit on his head has come. He's staggering around the ring. His press conferences are rambling, discursive, do not add up, do not make sense. He's dismissed staff after staff after staff, and then half the staff end up in jail as crooks, as felons, who he then has to go unpardoned. Now, no one can match me for my disdain for the Clintons as political operators. She won with a majority of the popular vote. So she didn't manipulate her way out of it. The system manipulated her way. I'm sort of, as I said, far from ecstatic with her prospects. What we have now is a president who is refusing to say that he will accept the results of the next election. Just consider the implications of that. This is a country that prides itself on its constitution. It prides itself on its democracy. And we have a president who is basically saying, well, I'll see how the results go and then I'll decide whether or not I'll accept them. And He's also sending, the great proponent of states' rights and the Republicans, is sending unmarked federal troops, border-to-border patrol people, in full military combat gear into city centres where the governor, the elected governor of those states, the elected mayor of those cities, has said they don't want them. But he's the great Democrat. He's the great believer in states' rights. He's the great opponent of the federal government. And he's putting the jackboot in there. No, he does not add up. He doesn't have a coherent philosophy. The one coherent philosophy he has is that Donald Trump should make a lot of money and he should be re-elected. That's it, basically, beginning and end. Anything else is just commentary.
Now, Charles, COVID-19, many believe that is far from beaten, despite optimism about a vaccine, and the timing and its efficacy are not known either. So when would recovery occur, given the circumstances?
Well, it's very tough to say. I mean, if the bureaucrats, the World Health Organization, and others insist on the theory that we can't reopen the economy until there is a vaccine just for COVID-19, what if there's COVID 2021? Then we'll see what happens. But again, as I said earlier, I think it was, I will fault Donald Trump for relying on Dr. Fauci in the very beginning and Dr. Birx. My distinguished colleague here says that no one can come close to him in opposing the Clintons. I think you should check my record a little bit on that. The Clintons were very much involved in a similar health scare that created the Global Fund. It rushed into the Global Fund and ended up pouring adulterated HIV/AIDS drugs around the world, harming black people, people of color, particularly in India and in Africa. So I think these headlong rushes to attack problems without evidence, where we're committing hundreds of billions, now trillions of dollars in COVID, are massive mistakes. On the point, I just want to respond to one thing. Donald Trump's extended staff runs into thousands of people, and there's certainly not half of his staff in prison. If we're talking about people bumbling through press conferences, I think we're talking about Joe Biden, that is to say, when he ever has them. Donald Trump does pretty well on his feet for somebody who's 74, and he's taking on the swamp, the established swamp in both political parties in ways that have never happened before.
Mm-hmm. Ian, do you want to comment on that?
I still think he behaves like an amateur boxer who's just spent 10 rounds in the ring with Muhammad Ali. He doesn't know where the next punch is coming from. He rambles. He's discursive. He does not answer the questions that are put to him. He is taking advice now from a literal witch doctor. Before we used to joke about the political advisors being witch doctors. We've literally got one who's warning about alien genes and sex with demons at the moment, who he's citing as his expert. Now, the problem with Fauci and Birx wasn't that the advice they were given was wrong, was that they were being politic. They realized that to stay in this administration, they had to go halfway with the mythology that he'd built up about pseudo-drugs and the various forms of witchcraft that he'd been recommending, that he'd seen on Twitter the night before. And so they went along. Maybe they shouldn't have done. They should have been more explicit right from the beginning. The question of masks and others, it's now, I think, established by a lot of people. The point of masks is to stop you infecting other people. It's your responsibility. The one thing about this virus, it's not just any virus that there might be an indicator against. And you know this in Iran from your own experience, right, that it is a uniquely infectious virus, that all you need is to have somebody breathing in a room to get it out there. This is, it might not be in terms of mortality, but this is one of the most infectious diseases around. Yep. I'm not looking forward. I'm confidently expecting at some point I'll get it. Whether I'll survive it or not, I don't know. I've been in intensive care. It's not a pretty experience. Don't like being intubated. But that's the prospect in front of people. So we shouldn't lighten it and make it just another flu. I've had flu. I've had, like I said, I've been in intensive care. I know the difference. Lots of people do. But this is uniquely infectious. And you have to see the death rate. You have to see the container trucks filled with rotten corpses, because the capital of the financial world cannot cope with the amount of dead. This is stuff from the Great Plague and the Black Death. They're not quite coming through the streets with wagons shouting, "Bring out the dead." But it's close to it. People are taken into the hospital and then they die. And then they can't get rid of them. There's so many of them. This is the most efficient city in the world, apparently. This is the head of the world economy, and they can't deal with their debt, let alone with the law.
Ian, I'm sorry, we're running out of time. If you allow me, I'll ask one quick question. Charles, President Trump has been boasting of doing a lot to improve the economy, and it's now facing a terrible situation. How could this affect his votes in the November election?
Well, I think this is a lot like 2016 with an important difference. In 2016, I myself, because I was taking on the Clintons so actively over the corrupt Clinton Foundation, did not vote. I didn't want the Clintons to be able to say that I'm just saying these negative things because it's political. And thinking about Donald Trump, he ran a family business. He'd never been in politics before. Today, you have somebody you may dislike what he's doing. When we see the many steps that he's taken for the good, and there are many, and we see mistakes, and people make mistakes. On balance, it's a simple call. Do you want mobs or jobs? And I think a lot of people, when they see the degree to which the cancel culture will shut you down if you dare to say you're pro-Trump, are not being honest with the polls. I think the polls are not dealing with likely voters. The notion that the popular vote matters is ridiculous. Until you change the Constitution, it's irrelevant. It's electoral votes. And on an electoral vote basis, I think Donald Trump is prepared to win in a landslide again, a wider landslide.
Ian,
the question
you also
will be
have 30
down
seconds.
ballot in the House and the Senate. What happens?
Sorry, Ian, 30 seconds only.
I'm from New York. I remember Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump practically making love in public together. They were so close. It's only when he wanted to run for president that he suddenly discovered what a despicable woman she was. The things are bad. They're getting worse. They're visibly bad. Donald Trump is a disaster economically. He's incredibly brilliant politically. He seizes the opportunities. He speaks the language of a lot of people out there. They're the people who believe in witch doctors, who believe whatever they're told by the latest guru.
Okay, sorry. Ian, I got to jump in. I'm sorry for that. We're out of time. Let me thank our guests. We had right-wing political analyst Charles Ortel from New York, and also from New York we had senior analyst with foreign policy in focus, Ian Williams. And thank you for watching this debate. I'll see you next time.